Daniel had always been drawn to the unexplained. As a journalist for a paranormal magazine, he spent most of his career debunking myths and urban legends. But when he heard about Black Ridge House, he felt an unease he couldn't shake. The house had been abandoned for over 50 years. Located deep in the countryside, far from the nearest town, it was said to be the site of multiple disappearances. The last known resident, a woman named Eleanor Grayson, had vanished without a trace in 1965, leaving behind a fully furnished but eerily untouched home. Since then, every attempt to resell or renovate the house had failed. Workers refused to enter, claiming they heard whispers and saw shadows moving on their own. Determined to uncover the truth, Daniel packed his camera, flashlight, and a few supplies. He planned to spend the night alone in Black Ridge House. The house stood at the end of a long, overgrown driveway. Tall, skeletal trees loomed over it, their bare branches scratching against the wind. The structure itself was intact but wrong. The windows were too dark, as if something was waiting inside. Daniel stepped onto the porch, the wooden planks groaned beneath his weight. He pushed the heavy front door open, revealing a grand foyer coated in dust. A chandelier hung above, its crystals dulled with time. Then, something strange happened. The air changed. It was subtle, like the house exhaled. A chill crawled up Daniel's spine. He shook it off and pressed on, setting up his equipment in the main hall. He began snapping pictures, noting how the furniture was arranged as if someone had just left. A tea set sat on the coffee table, its cups still in place. A rocking chair in the corner faced the fireplace. Then, the chair moved, just an inch but enough for Daniel to see. He gripped his flashlight tighter. "Wine draft," he whispered, though every door and window was sealed shut. Then, a whisper drifted through the air. He froze. A woman's voice, soft, distant. "Help me." He turned toward the sound, his breath catching in his throat. The whisper had come from the hallway leading to the basement. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to leave. But if he ran now, he'd have no story, just another urban legend left unexplored. Gathering his courage, he followed the voice. The basement door was slightly ajar. A heavy scent of damp earth and decay rose from the darkness. He turned on his flashlight and began his descent. The stairs creaked louder than they should have, each step dragging him deeper into the shadows. At the bottom, the air was heavy, suffocating. Rusted shelves lined the walls, filled with rotting books and strange trinkets. Then, he saw it. A mirror. Tall, old, and covered in dust. It stood in the center of the room, propped against the wall as if it had been placed there deliberately. Something about it made his skin crawl. He raised his camera, snapping a picture. The flash illuminated the room, but in the mirror's reflection, the room was not empty. A woman stood behind him. He spun around, nothing. Panting, he looked back at the mirror. The woman was still there. Her face was twisted, hollow eyes locked onto him. Her lips moved, forming silent words. Then, she reached for him. The mirror shattered. Daniel stumbled back, heart racing. The room grew colder. Whispers swarmed the air, overlapping, pleading. Then, the door slammed shut. The whispers stopped. Silence. Complete and suffocating. Then, at that moment, there was a knock on the door 3 times, fingernails against glass. He turned, slowly. The mirror, now shattered on the floor, should have been empty. Instead, in every broken shard, the woman's face remained. Her whisper rose again, clear this time. "You shouldn't have come." Panic surged through him. He lunged for the door, yanking at the handle. It wouldn't budge. Then, the air shifted. The pieces of the mirror began to move. They slid across the floor, pulling together, reforming but not into a reflection, into a doorway. Beyond the glass, he saw another room, one that didn't belong to this world. A dark, endless corridor stretched before him. And from within its depths, something moved. Hands, dozens of them. Twisted, clawing, reaching. For him. The whispers turned to screams. The door behind him ripped open. With every ounce of strength, Daniel ran. He didn't look back. He burst onto the porch, collapsing onto the dirt. The house stood behind him, silent once more, but the front door was still open. Inside, in the shadows of the foyer, something watched. And as Daniel staggered to his feet, he realized his reflection was no longer his own. Thomas had always been skeptical of ghost stories. He was a man of logic, of reason. When he inherited his uncle's old, decaying mansion in the middle of nowhere, he saw it as nothing more than a bird in a place to sell and be done with. But when he arrived at Grimshaw Manor, something felt wrong. The air was too thick, the shadows too deep. The windows, though covered in years of dust, seemed to follow him. No matter where he moved, the sensation of being watched never left. At first, he blamed it on his nerves. The house had been empty for decades, after all. But then, on his second night, the whispers began. At first, they were subtle. A distant, unintelligible murmur that drifted through the halls like wind through an old pipe. He ignored it, rationalized it. Then, it grew louder. That night, he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, when he heard it. Thomas, his name, spoken in a voice not his own. He sat up, heart pounding, straining to listen. Silence. Then, a footstep in the hallway. He held his breath. Another, and another. Slow, deliberate steps, coming closer. Then, they stopped, right outside his door. A shadow stretched beneath the gap, shifting, waiting. Then, there was a knock on the door 3 times. A chill ran down his spine. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. Then, the door handle twisted ... and the door slowly creaked open. The hallway was empty ... but Thomas knew he wasn't alone. He grabbed his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The house stood still, silent, as if mocking him. Then, something scurried past the doorway. Fast. Inhuman. Thomas swung the flashlight toward the movement, but nothing was there. Just the long, empty corridor stretching into the abyss ... A breath of icy air caressed his neck. Then, in the far end of the hallway, a door slammed shut. A gust of wind blew past him, but the windows were shut. He could feel it now. Something was moving inside the walls. A faint rustling, a scrape against the wood, like fingernails dragging through hollow space. The whispers grew more insistent. You shouldn't have come. He tried the front door, locked, the windows nailed shut. His breath quickened as he moved from room to room, his panic rising. It was as if the house itself had decided he was not allowed to leave. He found an old study, lined with dust-covered books. A large wooden desk stood in the center, papers scattered across its surface. One caught his eye: a journal. The first few pages were filled with mundane notes from his uncle about repairs and expenses, but the later entries, they made his blood run cold. The house watches me. The mirrors show things that aren't there. Doors open at night. Someone whispers in my ear while I sleep. I see my own face in reflections, but it doesn't move when I do. The final entry was barely legible, written in frantic, erratic stroke. The whisper returned, louder now. Let me in. Terrified, Thomas bolted for the stairs, his only thought the attic. The attic door was unlocked, as if waiting for him. He hesitated, then stepped inside. The room was too quiet. The dust in the air felt thick, suffocating. Then he saw it, a large, antique mirror. Unlike the rest of the house, the mirror's surface was pristine, as if it had been cleaned daily. Then, his reflection blinked. He hadn't. The whispers returned, circling him. The attic door slammed shut behind him. Then his reflection smiled. Let me in. The glass cracked as something pushed from the inside. His hand pressed against the mirror. But it wasn't his. The skin was gray, rotting. The mirror shattered, and Thomas felt himself pulled in. The house stood silent for years after. The next heir refused to claim it. Visitors spoke of lights flickering in the attic, of shadows moving behind the windows, and sometimes, when the night was just right, the front door would open on its own, as if inviting someone in. The attic window remained unbroken, its glass reflecting an empty room. But if you looked closely, just closely enough, you'd see a shadow moving behind the glass. And sometimes, just sometimes, if the wind was still, you'd hear the whisper, "Let me in."